The rain stops. Light breaks through the clouds at a low angle. And there it is, arching across the whole sky, colors bending from one horizon to the other. A child grabs an adult's arm and points. Nobody in the group has a name for this. Nobody has an explanation. They just stand there, staring at something that appeared out of nowhere and will vanish just as fast. Most people assume ancient humans looked at a rainbow and simply panicked, treating it as a random omen born from pure ignorance. That's not what the evidence shows. Across completely unconnected regions of the world, ancient cultures built strikingly specific, structured explanations for rainbows, often arriving at eerily similar ideas without ever speaking to each other. Let's start with what a rainbow actually is, because the mechanism matters for everything that follows. Sunlight looks white, but it's actually a mix of every visible color blended together. When light enters a raindrop, it slows down and bends. Different colors bend by slightly different amounts. The light bounces off the inside back wall of the droplet, exits, and bends again on the way out. That double bend separates the colors into the band you see. Every single raindrop is doing this at once. Millions of tiny prisms, working in unison, mid-air. Here's a detail that surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. A rainbow always appears directly opposite the sun from your position. Always. If the sun is low behind you, the rainbow arcs high in front of you. This isn't a coincidence or a rough tendency. It's fixed geometry, accurate to a specific angle, roughly 42 degrees between the sunlight, the raindrop, and your eye. Ancient humans couldn't have known the number, but they absolutely could have noticed the pattern. Rainbows only show up with the sun at your back, and rain somewhere ahead. That pattern recognition alone represents real, functional science, built entirely without instruments. A hunter-gatherer tracking weather across seasons would have learned that a rainbow meant the storm was breaking, the sun was returning, and safe movement was likely again soon. This wasn't mysticism. It was applied meteorology, centuries before anyone wrote the word down. Now think about the cultural side of this for a moment. If you saw a massive, glowing, multicolored arc appear in the sky with zero warning, no sound, and no clear source, what explanation do you think your mind would reach for first? A bridge to somewhere else? A living creature? A warning? Tell me honestly which direction your imagination would go, because the answer says something about how differently, or similarly, human minds fill in genuine mystery. Across the world, several completely separate cultures landed on one recurring idea: the rainbow as a connector between two worlds. In Norse mythology, the rainbow appears as Bifrost, a burning bridge linking the human world to the realm of the gods. In ancient Greek tradition, the rainbow was personified as Iris, a messenger who traveled between the heavens and the earth along that very arc. Halfway across the planet, with no contact between these cultures whatsoever, the same underlying instinct shows up again. Aboriginal Australian traditions, some of the oldest continuously practiced belief systems on Earth, describe a rainbow serpent, a powerful creator being associated with water, storms, and the shaping of the landscape itself. This concept appears across many distinct Aboriginal language groups, each with its own version, independently converging on a living, serpent-like force tied directly to rain and rainbows. In parts of Chinese folklore, the rainbow was explained as a literal crack in the sky, mended long ago by a figure who patched the heavens using stones of 5 different colors, and the rainbow's bands were the visible seam of that ancient repair. Once again, a completely separate cultural tradition, arriving at its own explanation, built around the same visual puzzle, colored bands stretched across a break in the sky. If this part surprised you, that cultures with zero historical contact kept independently building bridge, serpent, or seam explanations for the exact same phenomenon, sit with that pattern for a second, because it says things real about how human minds process an unreachable, boundary-crossing, temporary event. We don't just fear the unexplained. We tend to organize it the same handful of ways, over and over, everywhere on Earth. There's a reason the unreachable part kept showing up too, and it's not folklore, it's physics. Since a rainbow's position depends entirely on the exact angle between the sun, the raindrops, and your own eyes. No two people ever see the exact same rainbow. Move 10 feet to the side, and the rainbow you're looking at shifts along with you, because it was never a fixed object hovering at a fixed location in the first place. It's closer to a projection than a place. This is precisely why chasing a rainbow, walking toward it, trying to reach its base, never works. There is no base. It moves exactly as fast as you do, forever staying just out of reach, which likely fed directly into stories about rainbows marking something magical or impossible to physically claim. Height changes the shape of a rainbow dramatically, and this detail rarely makes it into casual explanations. From ground level, you typically see an arc, because the ground itself blocks the lower half of the circle. Get high enough, in an aircraft or on a tall cliff, and a rainbow can appear as a complete circle, colors forming an unbroken ring with no horizon cutting it off. Ancient humans standing on high ridgelines or mountain passes may have occasionally witnessed this fuller, more dramatic version, something a person standing in a low valley would never see in their entire life. Double rainbows carry their own layer of detail worth separating out. A second, fainter arc sometimes appears above the primary one, with its colors running in the exact reverse order. This happens because some light reflects twice inside the raindrop, instead of once, exiting at a different angle and flipping the color sequence. Between the two arcs, the sky often appears noticeably darker, a real effect known as Alexander's band, named after the ancient philosopher Alexander of Aphrodisias, who described and questioned this exact dark gap roughly 1800 years ago. People were documenting precise rainbow details long before anyone could explain the optics behind them. The actual mathematical explanation for the rainbow's angle didn't arrive until the 17th century, when René Descartes worked out the geometry of light entering and exiting a spherical raindrop, correctly calculating that primary rainbow angle near 42 degrees using nothing but careful geometric reasoning and observation. For roughly all of human history before that moment, the rainbow remained something people could predict, track, and build entire belief systems around, without ever mathematically proving why it worked the way it did. That gap between reliably predictable and fully explained is worth sitting with. Ancient humans didn't need Descartes' geometry to use a rainbow as a genuinely functional signal. They needed pattern recognition, repeated across enough storms, enough generations, enough shared observation passed from person to person. The explanation came late. The practical use came early, and it worked perfectly well without the math attached. Fear likely played a real role too, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. A massive colored arc appearing suddenly in the sky, right alongside a violent storm just moments before, gave plenty of raw material for genuine unease. Some traditions treated rainbows as warnings, a signal that forces were actively at work overhead. Fear and function weren't mutually exclusive. A single rainbow could represent both a practical weather cue and a genuinely unsettling sight, depending on what a specific culture chose to emphasize. There's a detail about color perception itself worth adding here, because it complicates the 7 colors idea most people take for granted. A rainbow is actually a smooth, continuous gradient with no hard lines separating one shade from the next. The familiar 7-color breakdown, red through violet, traces back specifically to Isaac Newton, who deliberately divided the spectrum into 7 bands, partly to match the number of notes in a musical scale. A number he found culturally meaningful, rather than physically forced by the light itself. Ancient observers, with no such framework imposed on them, may have simply seen a continuous river of color, rather than a fixed set of discrete stripes, which likely shaped how differently various cultures described and counted the bands they saw. Not every ancient culture treated the rainbow as purely symbolic or purely practical. Some genuinely blended both functions into a single framework. Certain agricultural societies tracked the seasonal timing of rainbows relative to planting and harvest cycles, treating a rainbow's appearance at a specific point in the year as a genuinely useful marker for timing critical farming decisions, layered directly on top of whatever spiritual meaning that same rainbow also carried. The practical and the symbolic weren't competing explanations. They lived side by side in the same belief system, doing two different jobs at once. Animals respond to weather shifts surrounding a rainbow too, and ancient humans almost certainly noticed this alongside the rainbow itself. Birds resuming activity after a storm, insects emerging as humidity drops, herd animals moving back into open grazing areas once rain clears. All of this tends to happen in the same narrow window, when a rainbow is likely to appear. A rainbow wasn't an isolated visual event in an otherwise unchanged landscape. It arrived as part of a whole cluster of environmental signals, all pointing toward the same conclusion. The danger of the storm had passed, and normal activity could resume. Lunar rainbows add one final layer of detail that very few people ever encounter directly. Under the right conditions, moonlight produces the same optical effect as sunlight, creating a faint, often colorless-looking arc visible only at night. Human night vision struggles to detect color in low light, so a lunar rainbow typically appears as a pale, ghostly band rather than a vivid spectrum. Ancient humans who witnessed this rare event, a colored arc in complete darkness, with no sun anywhere in the sky, were looking at one of the strangest versions of an already mysterious phenomenon. And it likely produced some of the most dramatic mythological interpretations of all, precisely because it broke every rule the daytime version seemed to follow. There's one more practical detail worth mentioning before we close. Coastal communities developed their own rainbow-based weather shorthand, watching whether a rainbow appeared in the morning or the evening to estimate incoming versus departing weather. Since a morning rainbow generally means the storm is moving toward you, while an evening rainbow usually means it's already moving away. Ancient inland groups tracking herds and seasonal rains likely built similar directional shortcuts, tuned to whatever local weather patterns governed their specific territory. So the next time a rainbow appears after a storm, remember that you're looking at the exact same optical event ancient humans spent thousands of years tracking and building entire mythologies around. Long before anyone could explain the geometry behind it, different cultures, oceans apart, looked at the same unreachable arc of color and reached for remarkably similar answers: a bridge, a serpent, a seam in the sky. Maybe that says less about rainbows and more about what happens inside a human mind the moment it meets something beautiful, temporary, and just barely out of reach.